Hey guys, how's it going? I'm doing well. I continue to progress, basically doing quite good, exercising, working, everything. And I just want to talk about the prominence and the role of anxiety in these conditions. And I've really come to understand anxiety as being the central feature of this whole CFS fibromyalgia thing. And for those of you who don't know, I had it for many years. I gradually worse, to the point that I was completely dysfunctional, bedbound, unable to function, had to be taken care of. And now I'm getting better and better, and I'm doing quite well. I'm exercising, working, everything, is kind of like more or less normal. I still have some symptoms, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the thing that got me moving was Dr. Sarno's book, Healing Back Pain, where he presents the idea that the symptoms are a consequence of repressed emotions. This is a Freudian concept where your mind tries to distract you in order that you don't feel these emotions, like anger being the central one in Sarno's conception. And that idea didn't quite ever really make complete sense to me, but there's a role for emotions for sure. I would just talk about it differently. But there's also a chapter on fear conditioning and conditioned responses and how symptoms are a consequence of these conditioned responses. And I think it's more or less on point. And if you look at my videos where I talk about my recovery, the thing that I seem to be talking about the most is this exposure therapy where you increase your activity, mental or physical or whatever it is that you fear will give you more symptoms. And what will happen is inevitably you get anxious about it and you often have an increase in symptoms, but you soothe yourself, you remind yourself that you understand what's going on, where the symptoms are coming from. And you continue this process, and it takes repeated exposure, constant increase, so long as you have it in your mind that something is dangerous for you to do, and then you won't be well because of it. It'll continue, the condition will continue. And I still haven't 100% let go of everything, but I'll get there for sure. But what I realized, what I've been focusing on lately is just reading a lot of psychological literature on anxiety per se. And one key thing that I noticed is that these could also be conceptualized as symptoms of anxiety. For example, fatigue. If you're an anxious person, now, if you had asked me 10 years ago, are you an anxious person? I would have said, hell no. And I would have meant it. And that's for two reasons. I wasn't aware of my own anxiety. I really wasn't aware. Like somewhere I understood that I'm anxious, but it wasn't on the surface, like I didn't think of myself as being an anxious person. But the second reason is I felt anxiety as a kind of a weakness, like it's not good. If you're anxious, that there's something wrong with you. You're weak. It's like a moral failing type of thing, and of course this is complete nonsense. In fact, if you're an anxious person, it means the mechanism that kept you safe through our evolutionary history is working quite well. So maybe it's a good thing. So anxiety, if you're an anxious person, which I now realize I'm a very anxious person. Another thing I've talked about on this channel is perfectionism. That is basically a form of anxiety. It's a pattern of anxiety. As I've been sort of reading a lot of the literature now on anxiety, fatigue is a very common somatic symptom of anxiety, and this is not well known, by the way, to primary care physicians. It's they don't focus on this, They check the physical stuff, which Dr. Sarno also talks about a lot. And they think in terms of that stuff. The psychological aspects they don't get into, they don't have time, they don't have the inclination, it seems. It's changing, but it's very slow. Fatigue and there's a host of somatic symptoms that are in the literature. It's been well documented, it's known, but that knowledge isn't part of the medical system, like at the doctor that you go to, your gastroenterologist, your neurologist or whatever. Well, neurologists might know better, but anyway, I don't really know like all the intricate details of like which specialties get training in these types of things. But the thing is, it's well documented that people go undiagnosed for years and years and years, especially when it comes to generalized anxiety disorder. And somatic symptoms are typically, frequently, the main complaint that the patients will come to see doctors with, and they go undiagnosed. And all these somatic symptoms like stomach symptoms and fatigue and including pain are part of the anxiety picture. Now, I think there's a second component to this that makes it not quote-unquote just anxiety. Like just is not the right way to phrase it, because it's not just anxiety, it's anxiety. Anxiety can be quite serious. If everybody experiences some worry, anxiety, that's normal, but then there's excessive anxiety that can be just horrible, make your quality of life just really bad. So I think saying it's just anxiety is not sufficient. I think we also have to add that it's a particular pattern of anxiety that is not part of the literature, but maybe one day this will be merged in, and that is that whole thing with pain sensitization. People who experience anxiety frequently or excessively, it is also documented in the literature, in the scientific literature, that people who experience anxiety frequently or excessively, it contributes to pain sensitization in the brain. In case you don't know, pain sensitization is basically the central feature of fibromyalgia and all these other pain conditions, and it's part of CFS as well, and that is basically things hurt a lot more than they should. That's sort of the very sort of simple way of phrasing it. So anxiety contributes to that a great deal. And then there's another dynamic that develops, that now the pain becomes a thing that we fear and have anxiety about. So it becomes this vicious circle. So I've discussed this on the channel before, but here's just looking at it from another angle, from looking at the anxiety disorders literature, and then incorporating into that the view of the pain sensitization thing. If you think about it, it makes sense. Anxiety is a response to threat, and pain is another threat signal, saying, careful, there's danger, protect. And so is fatigue. Fatigue says, you're out of energy, rest. And when those symptoms, which are absolutely real, themselves now become something that we fear, it just creates this vicious circle: anxiety, pain sensitization, avoidance behavior, and you would just get stuck in this, and you can live your whole life like this if you don't figure out what the hell is going on, and if you don't, frankly, find the courage to then, once you understand what is going on, to then move forward, even though it's difficult, even though it hurts sometimes, and even though it's scary sometimes, and but what's waiting on the other side is freedom, is life. So there's this dynamic, in addition to the typical anxiety disorders dynamic, that we can incorporate into the picture, right? The pain sensitization and the vicious circle of fearing symptoms, avoiding symptoms, and so on, creating more anxiety. The other thing that contributes to pain sensitization is anger. This is also from the research directly. And again, everybody experiences anger, but if it's excessive and it's frequent, then it becomes a contributing factor, and other stresses as well. So I mentioned the term repressed emotions from Sarno before, and that is, as I said, not the way I like to think about it, because the Freudian framework just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But if you look at my videos, I often use the term threatening emotions, and I came to that sort of just intuitively reflecting on my sort of inner life, introspecting. But then I recently discovered that this is part of also anxiety literature. They talk about how people who develop anxiety disorders often are not comfortable with emotions. They consider them threatening, which is very close to Sarno's conception, but that connects with me. The way Sarno talks about it doesn't connect with me so much, because I've discussed this before anyway. So yeah, so for instance, you know, anger, experiencing anger, like if you have some ideas that I shouldn't be experiencing anger, I should have my emotions under control, like if you were brought up that way, or if you, whenever you got angry, you got punished for it, you know, it becomes, when the emotion arises, it becomes a threat. You perceive it as a threat. It's an internal event, an emotion arising, you know, but you experience it as just the same as you would if a tiger was coming at you. It's a threat. It's just another threat. The same system in the brain is dealing with both external threats and internal threats, and that contributes to anxiety. So that makes sense then why for some people just writing about their emotions, getting comfortable with their emotions, experiencing their emotions in a safe context, for example with a therapist, or even if you're writing at home but you feel like you're safe, you know, and you know you're sort of, and it's not overwhelming for you, it's not too much, then that helps a lot of people. But it's not enough. It's not enough for everybody. Maybe it's not enough for the majority, especially when the thing that you have is CFS and fibromyalgia, because that's sort of a more ingrained pattern of anxiety, you know. Like if you have shoulder pain that's been there for a few months, maybe that's easier to get through with just writing exercises. And if emotions happen to be the main trigger for your anxiety and for that whole process. But there's no reason to only do one thing, you know, attack it from all angles, see what makes the most sense for you, and just do it that way. But it's good to have a complete picture of what's going on. So that's on the role of emotions in anxiety. So yeah, so this is what I wanted to tell you guys. Just wanted to give you my thoughts on the final thing, maybe the most important thing, is that I'm focusing now not just on getting over the anxiety over symptoms, but also all my other anxieties, which I have done in part, but now I'm really focusing on I'm basically anxious about everything, you know what I mean? Like I mentioned in other videos, like which toothpaste should I get? Oh, what if I get this one? Or and that's not right one I should have gotten, you know, and I get into this state, I'm like, what the hell is going on? And that's a treatable thing, you know, there's literature on that. I'm not going to get into it now, but cognitive behavioral therapy is quite effective for that. And I'll just list the anxiety disorders, the sort of from the DSM. They are what I just mentioned: generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, specific phobia, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and social anxiety disorder. Those are the main ones. Maybe there's others, but these are the 5 main ones. And so I'm sort of working in that area. In addition to symptom anxiety, I'm also deconditioning myself from all these other anxieties. And it kind of works in a similar way. There's a whole process and there's different approaches. But in the end, you have to avoid the safety behaviors, you know. Like if you're anxious to make a decision, you just make the decision and you sort of tolerate the anxiety. And then your brain learns, oh, I made the decision quickly, and I didn't have to read for 5 days to decide which toothpaste to buy, and I'm safe. So next time you get a bit less anxiety, and over time it fades. So that's where my focus has been. I hope you find this helpful. I hope you can share something that maybe this made sense to you somehow, or maybe a counterpoint. But that's where my mind has been at, and I just wanted to share it with you guys because, you know, on this channel here, I like talking to you guys sometimes just to let you know where I'm at and to hopefully give you some tips that you can get better yourself, you know, and find your own path out of this thing, because it is absolutely doable and you can find your path. I believe that very firmly now. So give me a like, subscribe. I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.